Hi, I'm Lori.
And I'm Kevin, and this is No Longer Ashamed.
We are survivors of childhood sexual abuse.
And we're here to share with you that if you're a survivor, you don't have to be alone.
Our logo is a salamander, and the reason is a fire salamander can survive a fire, and you have survived a fire.
We want to help you with your journey to healing and hope.
We are all survivors together, and we walk this journey together, and you are not alone.
By telling our stories, we are hoping that you will have the courage to share your stories as well and find your voice.
Because stories are so important, and for so long I know that I wouldn't tell my story, but when I finally shared my story, that's when I got my freedom.
And this is our journey and your journey to healing and hope. So come with us. Well, what I was thinking about recently is a friend of ours who I know, he talked about when he was young. I told him about the podcast. Actually, I think Charnel did, of course. And he said he wasn't a survivor, but he had been exposed to pornography at a really young age. Mm-hmm. And he said that was traumatic. He didn't think it was abuse, but I believe that pornography or exposure to pornography is abuse. I think it's got the same traumatic effects, especially in young children. And he was talking about how he was just a young child. I don't remember exactly how old, but like 2 or 3 or even, around that age. And he was looking at pornographic material, how traumatic it was in many ways and how it affected him. And the reason I was thinking about that was it's so much more accessible now than when we were younger. Pornography is just readily available, whereas it used to be really difficult for younger people, children, to get at it because it could be limited easier. Most of the porn when we were young was magazines and with the prevalence, it's gotten even more common, this exposure to porn to young children. And I feel like that is abuse, even though it isn't always exposure like someone showing it to them. But I think that's happening more now because it is so readily available.
It is. And I just did an interview with a neurocommunications and leadership coach. Her name is Dr. D. Trudupaskas, I think. And the reason that I bring her up is she said, even viewing something that's traumatic brings you to trauma. So we think we experience trauma, but she said very clearly, viewing it is traumatic. When we view something. So people that witness things, but also grandpa may not have thought it was traumatic, but the child knows we're born with this innocence and we have a sense of right and wrong. And so that is trauma for the child. And, we've talked about this before, like we don't want to rate our trauma. Like, well, at least blah, blah, blah. Trauma is trauma. And I think that I love that you brought this up because to hear a doctor just yesterday on my interview say, viewing content or viewing something perceived as traumatic is the same as going through it.
To your brain, it has the same effect. And the reason I'm bringing this up is how do we prevent this or how do we work against this? Because it is so easy to access now, and children have so much free time on their devices, and those devices is where they access it now, on media. And we didn't have that when we were young. We had solid media, I like to call it, books, magazines,
Well, I know for my grandkids, when they are finally allowed any kind of tablet or phone, their parents are very responsible and there's all these restrictions.
Yeah.
So I think that is a good way, but we know that there's kids that they don't have parents that will put those on. So I think that's a very valid and scary. When you asked that question, Kevin, it just made me sad and scared.
I know. Children today are exposed to so much that they shouldn't be. And I think for a parent or guardian of a child or even someone's cousin or niece, or what can we do to help them if they're exposed to that, or if they're curious about, because kids are curious about things like that, and if they hear about, they're going to wonder what it's about and then wonder if it's something they want to see or have. And I think explaining to them why, what, not only we talked about the safety box with children and, the places that you don't allow people to touch, but with media, I think what is helpful is to tell them that sex is for people to enjoy, but not to, and the different things about sex that and pornography and why pornography can be damaging to the young minds.
Yeah. And I think I think of different people who have done training programs for kids that's probably going to be included now. Like they're expanding a lot of things with sex trafficking, with the more we're exposed to, the more we're exposing our trainings. And I think of the group Michael and Marcus are involved in.
Oh, yeah.
They probably have some tools for that. But I think what's hard is that there's like for some kids, their parents are working 2 and 3 jobs. They're not monitoring, they're not paying attention. So it has to come in the teaching, but also kids are curious. Mm-hmm. And, it's like, how many people have you heard, well, my parents never gave me the sex talk. Mm-hmm. Like, so the parents don't really know how to address these things. And so kids are getting subject. And if it's brought to school, they might think, oh, this is fun or funny. They don't know that it's going to have an impact on them.
Yeah, they don't realize.
Yeah, and like we worry about kids when they stay overnight. Then they stay overnight, they could get abused. When they stay overnight, they could get exposed.
Yeah. So I think the most helpful thing you could do for your kids is make them aware of what it is, what it's about, and why it can be disturbing or damaging to them. And also to, I almost feel like treating it like a drug, because in a way it recreates what drugs effects are on our bodies. It's that dopamine kick. It's like gambling. It's not a drug, but it acts like a drug in your mind. It gives you a dopamine fix, and you get, at first it's traumatic for the children, but then if they get aroused, they're starting to get that fix, and they don't realize that that's addictive until it's too late and they're addicted.
Well,
so I think that's important to explain to them, is it can be addictive, and if it is, it's like a drug. It can take over.
Right. But also think about this, schools have these emergency drills.
Yeah.
Those are so traumatic on children. But are we not going to do them? And so I think there's got to be a fine line, because age appropriateness, if you start telling a kid and they haven't been curious, now they're curious, I think that, this is something worth really looking into with psychiatrists and, what is the next step in this kind of thing? And are they aware that this is happening and that viewing is as dangerous? And if so, how do parents begin to work with their kids without traumatizing them, without introducing it to them? Because I think, it's so easy to go. And honestly, even the DARE program, remember that? So many people said that wasn't effective. And yet someone I just talked the other day, the DARE program changed their life. So, I don't think it's a blanket thing, but I think it's the awareness that parents need to know that even viewing it is dangerous.
Yeah, especially viewing it, letting their kids view it somehow.
Or they don't even know that their kids are at the friend's house and the friend has more access on the phone than they're ever allowed.
One of the things that really was bothering me, though, was realizing that he didn't understand, my friend didn't understand that it was traumatic and it was abuse. He felt like he knew his reaction wasn't normal, but he didn't realize that was abusive, what he had been exposed to. And I think that's an important topic I'd like, is that, yes, it is abuse. If someone exposed you to pornography, if you were exposed to sex before you were understood it.
Yeah, something that we learned about sex trafficking, we learned with like Julie, is a lot of people don't have a name for what they're going through. They didn't know it was a thing. We see this with people who were in abusive relationships. They didn't have the words for gaslighting. And so I think, again, it's like building awareness so people know this is a thing, to give them the language to be able to say, oh, this isn't okay. I don't like it. Like we teach them to not touch, not let people touch you. But if they don't have the language for what they're looking at, that could be traumatic, then they can't speak to that, because like you say, they don't know it's a thing.
Yeah, they don't know whether or not it's or how it's going to affect them. I mean, I'm talking about children. I'm talking about really young children. There's statistics of, kids before they're the age of 12
Right.
being
And you don't want
exposed
to,
to hardcore pornography
right.
and they're traumatized
Yeah.
at the
But it,
same time, but they don't know why.
right. But it also is the training. There's got to be age appropriate training that doesn't re traumatize them by trying to tell them
Yeah, that's
not to be.
that's
So I think what you're bringing up is really valid. And I think it really needs to be, people need to become more aware that that's a thing. And even like we were talking about telling your stories, maybe if he would come on and share that story, somebody might be like, I didn't know. I didn't know. That's, because we know whatever we deal with as a child affects us as an adult. And so we may be struggling with things and we don't even realize it's because of something that we didn't know what it was.
Yeah, they didn't. I mean, you don't have a defense for it if you don't know it's wrong.
Hmm.
And you're not aware that it's wrong unless, it's been told. If you've been told that this is something that can affect you, this is wrong, this can be bad for you,
Yeah.
just like drugs, just like alcohol. I mean, we warn our kids about this stuff for the reasons that they're bad, but do we warn our kids about pornography because so many get exposed and it's so prevalent now? And I think we need to realize how traumatic it can be more aware of it.
Right. Yeah. And I think with the little children, it's the parents' responsibility. And so,
Hmm.
for instance, he was abused in that way. Then maybe he had kids, but he didn't recognize it as abuse. So maybe he allowed that for his children. So it's like recognizing it, seeing it so that we can protect the next generation and say what is.
Yeah.
Because if we don't believe it's wrong or bad, or we don't realize we're affected, we've seen this throughout history. We'll just go, what's the big deal? I mean, for women, 30 years ago, if you tried to talk about being abused, many, many, many mothers, grandmas will say it's just what happens to girls.
They
So
didn't
it's again,
recognize it,
yeah,
the issue so
right.
much.
And so it
And
takes the adult recognizing it to be able to then protect the child.
yeah, and I believe that's the important part right now is recognizing that pornography is abuse.
Yes.
Exposure to pornography is abusive and also it's traumatic and damaging to kids. And the best way to counter that is with awareness and talking about it and just like countering how we handle, talking about drugs and other abusive, damaging things.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the most important part is to make our kids aware, especially for many of them. They might see it by accident. They might be exposed in so many different ways because it is. I think that's why I really wanted to talk about that is I just realized I was thinking about my friend. He's older. He's of the age when it wasn't so prevalent but now it's practically everywhere and kids have access to it easier in their own privacy. They can access it by, back in our day, you had to go to an adult store or whatever to get it. And now it's just on whatever device you have if you know how to get it.
Mhm. Yeah. And again, there's that element of the really protective parents that set everything in place. But then the kid goes to school, goes to a friend's house. It is such a tragedy. And I mean, I do remember when my kids were growing up, I remember this mom who there was her husband looked at Playboys and they were in the bathroom. And because she had girls, she wasn't worried about it. But I remember being so upset that if the girls got curious, that they had access to them. And it felt so wrong to me. And I remember trying to have a conversation and the mom just wouldn't have it. She didn't see any problem with it. And, I remember I was a young mom at the time. And what did I think? Something must be
Hmm.
wrong with me that I would think that was bad if she's like, every house has them. So again,
Hmm.
it's that recognizing it because it does boil down to the adult's responsibility. So making the adults aware that this is abuse is going to be where it starts.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, you're right, that it is abuse. And, I remember the first time I realized what I was going through was abuse when I went to I've said this before, but I asked the school secretary what incest was.
Hmm.
And she told me, and I was like, kept my face straight and everything. And I walked away going, huh, I didn't know that. And I'm
Yeah.
living it, you
Yeah,
know?
Well, I don't know how else we can prevent it other than just making people aware that this is an issue.
It'd be great if your friend could come on and share his story so that.
Yeah, he said he wants to, but he's not ready yet. And actually, our friend Beth, who shared her story, she's shared it with many friends, and she said several of her friends have talked about what has happened to them. And one of them was, in fact, I believe it was she was addicted to porn. She had issues with porn, and that was another reason why I was thinking about this recently. Is we've talked to several women that had porn issues, and I think people don't realize, they think it's only just boys and boys get over it. Boys are curious and then they get over it. But no, it is addictive. It acts like a drug in your brain and you can get addicted to it whether or not you're a man or a woman. Women get addicted too. It has that dopamine effect for them as well.
We talk about how talking about sexual abuse as a child is different. I don't know if it's harder, but different for men than women. I think that's the reverse for pornography, is if a woman was to go to her Bible study group and say, I'm struggling with pornography, I don't think she would get the warm fuzzies of, let's help you. I think there would be judgment.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so hard to talk about. And what do we run into? People don't want to tell their story. They're scared. It's hard. And I understand that. But when we don't share our story, when we don't tell people, then they don't know. And it continues to happen. So what we're doing here in talking about it is really the first step. And if that's happened to you and you want to talk to us, you can click on our Facebook page. You can find on our web page, nolongerashamed.org, because your story will help others, even if it's hard for you. And it may not be time, and we understand that. But sharing your story is the only way people are going to understand. We can say it till we're blue in the face, but it's that lived experience that helps people understand. Oh.
Well, I think part of that is especially the shame of admitting you're addicted to porn. I think for anyone, male or female, admitting that they can't control themselves is so hard.
Remember the episode we had, was it with Dan? And he admitted to his church, and
Yeah.
he was judged and ostracized a little bit. And we don't want that. We want people to be able to find a place where they can heal and recover, not be judged.
Well, that's why it's so important to recognize it as abuse and take the shame away from the person who was damaged by it.
Yeah.
I think it's hard for anyone who's addicted to porn, if they, were exposed to porn at a young age and got addicted to that drug, that dopamine feeling, and now they can't control it, but they don't want to talk about it because it's so shameful, because they feel like it's their fault. And that's where I really feel bad, is it isn't their fault necessarily, because they were exposed. A lot of people are exposed at a young age when they shouldn't have been, when it was hard, traumatic for them. And yet they don't see it as a trauma. They think they just got curious. And so I think that's the key, kind of, is to take the shame away, realize that this is trauma and it had an effect on you. And because of that effect, it's affecting your life. So many people's lives have been just destroyed by pornography. They're controlled by it.
One time I wanted to do one of my little podcasts, Enough, and I wanted to talk about, if there wasn't a need for pornography, it wouldn't be being filled, and that there's such a need for it. And so if we are spouses and we're silent, or we're accepting of our partner's addiction rather than healing from it, then we're as much responsible for the propagation, because if there's no need, people aren't going to be filling that need, right? If we didn't smoke cigarettes, they couldn't make them anymore. So it's like, to me, that's the bigger picture. And if people are tolerant of it, even if they're not using it, wives, spouses, whatever, if they're tolerating it and not saying, hey, let's talk about this, let's get help, then maybe that's as much perpetuating it and keeping a secret as the toxic shame that comes with the people using it who can't speak.
Yeah, I think that's an important part. And one of the biggest issues is tolerance right now.
Yeah.
There is such tolerance to graphic sex images. And, it's funny because a lot of people say, we're so hooked on gore, but in American media, but sex is a big no-no. But actually, nowadays, sex is common in
Mhm.
all kinds of media. I mean, it's really difficult to screen it from kids when, all the different, they're not channels anymore.
Yeah. You're dating yourself.
All the different
Platforms.
platforms have so many things on them that are graphic sexually, and we don't really screen well.
Mm.
It's difficult. It's
And we think, what are you going to do? What's the harm? Am I just going to not watch anything or do anything? And that I know that, like, when my kids were young and they had no TV week, and it was like we had to decide as a family, are we going to watch no TV? Now we only had a few channels, and I did screen my kids TV watching, but I think sometimes it's easier for people to go, what's the big deal, than to take a stand and look like a weirdo.
yeah, I think it is normalized so we don't
That's a good
look
word,
at it as damaging.
normalized. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I'm glad you brought this up though, because I feel like sometimes when we start to recognize things, it's like, where do we start? Where's the most impact? Do we tell children? Do we traumatize children? Do we get adults first to recognize it and know what it is so they can better protect their children so that they're not told too early? Like, I think, it's one of those things where getting the word out, raising awareness so people go, oh, wait a minute, that's abuse. That's not healthy. That's not good for our brain, because whatever we view, we can't unsee. And when we're exposing children, even to gore,
Yeah.
that's trauma, and they can't decipher. They can't decipher what's real. And and I know sometimes people put too much pressure on video games, but when they're playing video games and they're killing people every day, something in their brain doesn't connect with reality, that when you kill someone, they don't pop back up
Yeah.
and start
Yeah.
their life over. So again, I think it's finding the way to first acknowledge these things and to prioritize them.
Yeah. Prioritize is very important. I think that's the thing. We don't take it as seriously
Hmm.
and
Like, what's the big
recognize.
deal? Yeah.
Yeah. And therefore we're not as concerned about as other things like drugs or gambling or, the things we warn our kids about, alcohol, all the things that we try to
Mhm.
scare them with. I mean, we try to scare them about sex itself, but not pornography.
In
And
fact, I heard some professionals, FBI professionals, say they were talking about, I talked about this before, how they're making babies talk on the internet.
oh yeah,
And so they're using this app for child pornography. And
yeah,
what some people are saying is let them do that. It's not hurting anybody. But the truth is they view it and then they want to do it. So
hmm,
it is harming, it is affecting, because we don't stay passive in the viewing. So if you think about that the FBI agents are warning against this, how much is your child going to view before they're going to want to do?
yeah, yeah.
And so it's
Well, and
more
that's it.
than the
Yeah,
education. Yeah.
pornography has a lot. I mean, these effects of pornography are very well documented on how it does affect us,
Hmm.
and men and women,
And marriages.
and marriages, and well, and their relationships.
Hmm.
So much is
Yeah.
affected, and yet we don't view, we kind of still blame the viewer. And I think that's where I'm concerned,
Yeah.
is because people don't want to talk about it, people don't want to get help for it because we blame them for it. But
Yeah.
I feel like we need to view it differently, that
Hmm.
it's an abusive thing and it's hurting people.
Yeah.
And I don't know
Again,
how to change that attitude.
well, one of the things is, what do we say when people tell you something, a story? We say, I believe you. If somebody dares to admit this to us, that we come at it with compassion and love. It's not your fault. You were exposed early. That we, as people who, may run into these people, it can start with us. It can
Yeah,
start with us saying, we believe you. That's abuse. How often did women go to the police and it was never called abuse?
yeah,
Now it's called abuse. It's like it has to start somewhere, and it can start one on one with us as people who listen, as people who are told things, to say, say, oh, I believe you, rather than, oh, you're having an addiction or whatever you might say, to not be afraid of it, but to say, there's help for that. I believe you. How can I support you? I remember when I needed counseling so bad, I was having panic attacks, but of course, then I didn't know what they were. And I had a friend say, can you call a counselor? Just one today. And I would call and I would get the recording and, this is how much it costs. And finally, after 4 days, one called me back and was able to work with me. So it's like, can we be that person that says, I'll walk you through this. I'll help you. Let's get help. Let's one step at a time, because that's where it has to start. People have to feel safe, that there's one person safe to talk to
about what's happened to them.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with recognizing pornography is abuse.
Yes.
And then recognizing that they're surviving abuse. And that's where we start to help them.
Right. If you're a parent that is into pornography, your kids will get on your computer. They will go in your bathroom. So if you have that addiction, do your darndest to at least protect your children. Yeah. If you're not willing to get help, at least don't set your children up for this.
Yeah.
There was someone I knew who had 2 daughters. It was a different person. The husband was into pornography. Well, the daughters went to use the computer for schoolwork. Guess what?
Mm-hmm.
They were traumatized.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility as parents. We may have our problems, but get help. If you don't get help, at least don't set your children up for it.
Yeah, it's just continuing the trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But attitude, I think attitude has a big effect in this issue. We don't feel like if we're viewing porn, it's a big deal because we've been kind of told it's just, and yet we don't realize that it can be harmful, especially to young kids. Or we don't treat it as like something that can be permanently damaging.
Yeah. I think your language you used earlier is we normalize it, and that way we can accept it better. I mean, I look at all the Jeffrey Epstein things that are going on, and somebody's been profiling Ghislaine, who they're thinking about setting free, but she groomed them. She was a high up in the English society, and people thought we can trust her. And then she put them in situations where they felt awkward, but she acted like everything was okay. So they thought maybe this is how you learn massage therapy. Like, we have normalized so much of this that people don't really know. And we've not taught people to trust their instinct. If it doesn't feel right or good, it's probably not.
Yeah. Well, I think the best way to start is just recognizing it.
Being aware.
Yeah.
And the thing is now, if you weren't aware before, you're going to start noticing things. You're going to start noticing okay, for instance, I played this little matching game, harmless, just matching game on my phone when I'm trying to kill a little time. And suddenly there's this new statue, and it has like this kind of like this thing wrapped around it. But every time I click on it, I'm like, that's a naked statue. Why does that naked statue have to be in and I'm not like coming against art or anything like that. But again, it's those subtle little things that I think the people in the porn industry do to normalize it, to draw people to what they're doing.
Yeah, well, it's a huge business.
So pay attention. That's what Charnel always says. Pay attention.
Pay attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, have compassion for someone who's being hurt by it.
And
if we view it as abuse, we'll have more compassion.
Right. And if it's you, give yourself compassion, find someone to talk to, get help, because it's not your fault.
Yeah, porn is abuse.
That's a huge statement.
I think it's
powerful. I feel
accurate like, mostly.
Yeah, I feel like, remember the one where you're like, where is the outrage? I feel like that's kind of this, and this is our part. Be aware. So yeah, we can make people aware, and each one of us has a responsibility. And when what is G.I. Joe? Knowing is half the battle. So this is a good time for us to pray.
So that's it for today.
We are going to have a prayer time if you want to stick with us. If not, we believe in you.
We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories.
If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find us. And we really want to spread this message.
Father, I just thank you for all your blessings and for your guidance. And I think if we follow your guidance and your love and your compassion, we will realize the reasons why pornography is so harmful. And just pray that your Holy Spirit would give us compassion for those who have struggled with and suffered under pornography and porn addictions or being exposed to porn. I pray that we would find ways to teach our children about it without damaging them further or causing them to be more tolerant of pornography. I think it's important that they register how dangerous and how bad and how hard it can be for them. And Lord, I just pray that you would give us the wisdom to help protect children, help them that we can find ways that they wouldn't be exposed to things that are damaging to them. In your name I pray.
Father, grace, mercy, wisdom are the words that come to me. And I love what Kevin said about normalizing, that when we normalize something, it takes the power away from the person who's really trying to protect themselves. And so I pray for the person who is struggling with that, Lord, and that maybe put it on their heart to reach out, maybe put it on their heart to tell the story. And I know telling the story is hard. Sometimes it feels too soon, but people need to know and people need to be aware. And if they don't know, I just think of the people that were being sex trafficked and they thought that person was their boyfriend. They had no idea that this was a thing. And I think of the people who are in abusive relationships with a narcissist and they don't even realize that all the ways that person is putting them down and treating them bad is a thing. And Lord, awareness and knowing that we don't have to live in those kind of conditions and that we can be forgiven, that we can have grace and mercy. And most of all, and we know that we say this and sometimes people in abuse say, but you don't know, but it's not our fault. And you have so much grace and mercy and love and for those going through it, and that you would just touch their heart and help them to know that they can be loved and accepted just for who they are, whatever's going on in their life, that you can be trusted and lead them to people that are trustworthy. In your son's holy name, amen.
Amen.